Hello, participants. Welcome back again. IIA Bombay chapter is thankful to the exclusive sponsors for this banking conclave, Baker Tilly India. We would urge you all to visit their booth on the platform and also do visit the IIA Mumbai chapter booth, which is there, which has all the resources available. Our next focus regulatory topic is anti-money laundering, which is going to be delivered by the subject matter expert, Mr. Dev Malia Maitra. Dev Malia is a senior director, banking and finance, BFSI at Chokshi Group, and he's also a partner at Chokshi and Company. He's associated with Fintellect Advisory Services as a faculty member. He's a seasoned professional with more than 30 years of experience in the banking and financial services industry, and more than a decade each in the new age private sector banks and life insurance companies, with 7 years in leading housing finance companies. Until recently, he was the chief audit and risk and compliance at Aegon Life Insurance. And prior to this, he was the head audit and risk management at HDFC Standard Life Insurance. Before this, he was also heading the audit and compliance at Centurion Bank of Punjab. Dev Malia is a chartered accountant in 1987, and he holds a bachelor's of commerce degree, honors in accountancy in 1985. He's experienced in setting up processes in a large number of startups in different areas uh, as part of core management team, and has hands-on experience in setting up and integrating the following functions: operational risk management, including fraud risk control units, regulatory compliance framework, including international compliance requirements like anti-money laundering, FATCA, CRS, etc., track regulatory changes and re-engineer processes based on the same. Um, Dev Malia was a member of the insurance delegation in the FATF evaluation relating to preparedness regarding anti-money laundering regulations in 2010 in India. He was also on the board of governors of IIA Bombay chapter between 2015 and 17. He's also a director on the board of AlibabaIndia.com, India E-commerce Private Limited. Thank you, and thank you, Dev Malia, and over to you for your next session.
Thank you, Percy. It's a pleasure to come back to this platform. Let me just share my screen. So, dear participants, I think again I am back on the session after lunch. Difficult time for all of us, but let's hope that anti-money laundering is a fascinating subject. I hope this will keep you interested in what we speak of in next 40-45 minutes, and then you'll have enough questions in this regard. So quickly, we will be covering regulations, some of the applicabilities, AMLs, and risk-based approach and common weaknesses that we normally see in AML programs. So if you look at AML applicability, now it's literally applicable across the financial services institutions. So it's not only banks, it's where it started. Now it's got into all other NBFCs, insurance companies, mutual fund brokers. In addition to that, certain areas like the jewelry, gems and jewelry industry, the casinos and the land registry also have their own requirements, reporting requirements under this act. The major regulations are the PML Act of 2002, which has been amended and updated in 2019. The rules relating to maintenance of records and other stuff. And all the regulators on their own have issued master circulars on KYC and AML, which is updated on a regular basis and every year. I know RBI's circulars updated up to 2020. So just a step back, I think most of you know this, that what we're talking of as money laundering is basically a process by which money which is tainted comes into the system, goes into placement. That's when it comes into a bank, or banking or the financial system. Then there's a process of layering, wherein a number of transactions take place to obscure the origin of this money. And then finally, it's what's called integration, where the money becomes a integrated part of that economy, whether it's through the financial system or through purchase of assets like investments in properties, etc. Now, what's important here is, earlier we used to talk only about money laundering as a risk. Now that has changed. We are talking of money laundering and terrorist financing at the same time. So it's now a MLTF risk. So in terrorist financing, the money could come in from a illegitimate source, go through all this process, and again go out into an illegitimate source or for financing the terrorists. And in case, it could be other way also. It could be the money is coming from a perfectly legal source, but it gets drawn out into an illegal activity. So there is this money which is coming in, which is tainted, which comes into the system. So earlier the risk was only that gets integrated into the system, but now as we recognize terrorist financing as a specific area, so the chances that this process is used, again the money goes back into an illegal activity or into a terrorist activity, which becomes dangerous for all of us. It's an anti-human kind of an activity. So that is why it's very important for us to understand that how we can break this cycle, and we can all contribute in, making such money, identify such money, and sort of, get them into one place. We don't let them spread into the economic system and start polluting the economic system. So since we are talking in the Internal Auditors Forum, so I've taken this mainly from the point of view of an auditor. So what do we look at from when we are looking at the audit of an AML program, AML system? So it's the whole AML life cycle. The AML life cycle comes in from the regulation, from where you draw your own compliance manuals and the policies. So then you have to test the policy and procedures and see they're applicable. Then what's called the CIP, or the customer identification process, which includes review of KYC, doing the customer due diligence, and when required, do an enhanced due diligence. Then check the customer against the sanction list. There are 3 major sanction lists in this world. UN, is what we have adopted as a country. But there are 2 other major sanction lists: OECD, sponsored by the European Union, and OFAC, which is sponsored by the US. So depending on your business requirement and how much of the international connections you have to decide which lists you are going to follow. If it's only requirement from the Indian regulator, it is the UN regulations. But moment it goes beyond the Indian regulations, you have to look at what more we need to do. So therefore, that's why all the 3 lists are very important to us today when we look at identifying sanctions. Then testing a transaction and evaluating the transaction itself, whether there's any problem with the transaction. Then generating alerts. There should be a regular process where alerts should flow in. And as you know, AML will not be only the compliance department's responsibility. It has to flow in from the business and the operations side, where they notice something which is incongruous. They report to what is in other countries known as the MLRO, or here we call them the principal officer. And that person and his team evaluates this whole issue and sees whether they find something suspicious. If they find something suspicious, they have to report to the government authorities, what is called the FIU, Financial Intelligence Unit. So that's the cycle. So therefore, process of generating alert is very important. because we have to look at whether we are generating adequate alerts. If we're generating too much, then there's too much of garbage and pressure on the system. If we're generating too little, then we might be missing the real entries. So all these can become a major risk. And finally, is filing of these reports. I have a separate slide on that. So when we go through, we will look at it. Training. Training is very important in AML because you have to keep on training not only the new people who join, but also people who are there in the system year after year, because there are so much changes, so many changes, so many new types of transactions that are coming through. The people are to be made aware so that they know what to look for, when they're looking for it. And finally, maintenance of records. If you look at the policies, programs, and the procedure, so if you can see that first is laying down the rules. So you have a regulation. The regulation gives you the base based on which you have to lay down your own rule, like as a company. So you have to form a policy, and to implement the policy, you need a procedure manual or a SOP. And that becomes the backbone of the whole AML system. Then how you are going to monitor it? So normally the policy is approved by the board and overall guidance is set up by the top management. Therefore, the tone at the top is important. If the tone at the top is this is a government requirement, so I'll just tick the boxes, then I'm not going to do justice to what I'm supposed to be doing. I personally believe that AML is a very good tool for your overall risk management strategy. So if you look at your risk management strategy, AML can fit in as one of the major areas in that plan, because once you have done a proper AML check, you are likely to have done a large part of your risk management checks, which you need to do anyway across the organization. So therefore, we should not look at it as a regulatory requirement. We should look at it more from the point of view of managing the risk. So these regulations have to be in line with the laws and regulations which we are of the country. So if there is any change in the law and regulation, the policy procedure document need to be reviewed and updated immediately. So because these are important legislation, they should be reviewed at least once a year. And as an auditor, what do I look at it? I look at whether the current policies and procedures cover adequately and whether the regulations are being properly covered. And level of compliance laid down at various levels. So if there's a compliance responsibility at a particular level, whether that is being followed. Because if one responsibility breaks, the chance is that the whole chain will break and you will not find what you really want to find. Ultimately, whatever we are looking at, we look at a risk-based approach for most of the stuff that we do. So understanding the risk is very important, what kind of risk we are going through. So if we look at the major way we can break, this is the 4 major areas which we need to assess so far as AML risks are concerned. First is the customer himself, whether the profile is good enough, does it match the business it's being supposed to be doing. So that's the customer level. Second is products and services offered. Because there are certain services or products which may be more prone to money laundering because of easy transfer of money. So therefore, those are areas which we need to look at and say, okay, this is a product where I might see a little higher amount of attempt for money laundering. So I have to have the region controls and mitigations properly in place. Third is geography or area of operation. So you may remember, especially if you're those going in international business, the geographies which have lax regulations are likely to be regulate areas or geographies from where you will get some problematic issues. And finally, the transaction itself and the delivery channel through which the transaction is delivered. All these areas can become, areas of risk for you. So we have to assess in each of these areas and see which one or whether each of them, what kind of risk they are showing, what are the controls we have for that, and if the controls are not adequate, what we can do further, and finally, what are the mitigants to offset, the risk itself. See, one of the things which we must remember that as a bank or as a financial institution, we're in the business of taking risk. So if we say we are completely risk averse, then we are fooling ourselves, because all we will be achieving is cutting our hands and feet by not doing enough business. So we have to do business. At the same time, we have to assess the risk and keep putting counter balancing controls in each of them. The assessment in the above parameters and controls should be documented and available for inspection, because these assessments are mostly now comes under regulatory scrutiny. And such risk assessment should be done at least once a year. Now, the first thing we earlier discussed, customer identification program, or the process of first identifying the customer. It's a major area of audit in itself in most of the banks and financial institutions. Any customer, whether asset, product or liability product, they are subject to due diligence. What we call commonly the know your customer or KYC. So what do we establish in KYC? The first thing for an individual we establish is the identity of the customer, and he resides in a particular place. For a corporate entity, we need to find out whether that legal person or a legal arrangement, as you know, legal persons are companies and LLPs, whereas arrangements and legal arrangements are like association of persons, trusts, etc. So we need to understand the document of incorporation, memorandum and articles, banker certificate, etc., to understand what kind of business they are into and whether they really need an account like ours. So that's what the initial customer due diligence does. And based on this, we try to understand the requirement of the customer. Again, very important from the point of view of bankers, because whatever we do, we must understand the requirements and the business done by the bank customer. If we understand the business done by the customer properly, we can guide him properly in matters like these, so that suddenly some dirty money doesn't flow into his system. Now, as you know, the government has now permitted digital KYC and e-KYC. So I spent some short time on this. So it can be done by various ways, including a two-way video application. It can be done through booking an appointment and with government-issued identity cards as proof, like KYC documents. And then you can also geotag a person these days. You can find out exactly where he is located, to find out whether he is actually within the area where the bank or the branch is operating. But these are now as good as face-to-face verification. These have security system built in. So people should not be apprehensive when they are using these modes for doing KYC for opening of accounts. In the present times, especially with this COVID pandemic, I think this has been a great boon for the customers to have been able to open accounts or do stuff from their home because of these kind of facilities. So now next comes the screening of the customers and the risk assessment. So as I mentioned earlier, there's this 2 or 3 sanction lists. So we have to match them against the names against the sanction list and see whether they are anyway involved with any of these sanctioned organizations. So now who are the sanctioned organizations? It could be anybody from your a terrorist organization, it could be somebody who's assisting the terrorist organization, or some other organization which are involved in unlawful activities. So therefore, it's important for us to know who, whether we can, if we find a customer in that list, we should not be doing business with them. So initially itself, we should be blocking that customer so that he doesn't come into my system. So based on these initial documents received and products in services that they require, location of the customer, we allot an initial risk rating to the customer. Now, the risk rating could be simple, low, medium, high. It could be on a scale of 5, it could be on a scale of 10, depending on the complexity of the organization. If the risk rating is low, then the process may be adequate. However, in case the risk rating is high or something else has been noticed which is not congruous to the customer's profile, then you need to conduct an EDD or an enhanced due diligence of the customer. So, what is enhanced due diligence? Again, I'll come back as we go along. Enhanced due diligence involves, or EDD involves understanding the profile and the business of the customer a little more. It's not just having his address and PAN card and forgetting about it. It's about getting more detail. What kind of business is he in? What business is he doing? And for an individual, you could have things like you can source of funds, income, source of income, if such kind of detail. Whereas for a legal person, you have to get the details of business, regulatory issues, legal disputes, market reputation, etc. So all these are important factors for us to determine whether we need to go in for this enhanced due diligence, and if we go in, what are we looking at specifically? So basically, for individuals, we're looking at whether the person has capacity to repay or capacity to do the business that he is claiming to be. And for a legal person, whether there's any issue with the plant or other thing, which comes out clearly when we look at this. So other than that, we can also have documents from verification from third-party databases and press reports. Very important, because whenever there is some adverse report, we have always seen there's something wrong coming up. Identification of beneficial ownership. Now, who's a beneficial owner? I'll come back later. And whether there is a PEP or a person, politically exposed person, or any of the relatives or associated who are involved with the customer. Because these persons are supposedly under ban, but how are they then operating? So far as politically exposed persons, it's very important to understand that it's not only them, it's their relatives and associates who are also coming under that list. We have to be very careful about, and if some of them are involved as a beneficial owner, we need to identify those, because the risks become completely different. Now, what's a beneficial owner? Beneficial owner means a person or a natural person who ultimately controls an organization. So there could be a series of legal entities, but ultimately who controls this organization? There has to be a human face to it. So that face is the beneficial owner. So in a lot of cases, it could be the same as the registered owner. There could be some other places where the beneficial owner is not coming forward, and is trying to be hiding behind a screen of other registered owners, lawyers, and other people. So that's when it becomes tricky. So far as AML is concerned, we need to try and determine who the actual owner is of this particular transaction. Similarly, a politically exposed person is a person who's been in prominent public place. So basically, it's considered a high-risk area for all governments because of the corruption and bribery involved in a lot of countries, and influence that they may hold in terms of getting themselves cleared or absorbed when these things come up. So what's important is in these cases, say a PEP has come and applied for a loan, we do not, or asked deposited some money, we do not say no to that person. What we do is we send it up one more level for a scrutiny. If the scrutiny is found okay, then we allow him to open the account. We don't want to really put a lot of alarm on the money launderer so that he starts running away and we are not able to trace him at all. Now, let's look at the common methods, which we have for this kind of for beneficial owners, particularly for not following the system. So first is a shell company. Now, what's a shell company? It's basically a legal vehicle. Typically doesn't have a physical presence, but has an address presence somewhere, and then generates little or no independent economic value. So therefore, not to be considered for any of the taxi rides or anything of that sort. Generates and not illegal. But one thing we must remember that basically legal vehicles has to, as a shell company, it will be legal. It will not be illegal, because if it's illegal, then you cannot do any business through it. So once you have a company like that available to you, it becomes a vehicle through which you facilitate a lot of activity, including AML and tax evasion. So that's why shell companies have become a major area of worry. The companies with very low capital base, which has shown or borrowed huge amount of money and then use the money for something which is not very clearly coming up. So that's the one area, which we look at day in, day out. Then secondly, we have shelf companies. That means companies which are kept ready. Somebody just comes and buys it off the shelf and starts using it for some of these transactions. You have a front company, where the front company is a company which has a legitimate business, but the people underlying or the business behind that company is illegal. So I think one of the major examples, as I remember, is from the good old book Godfather, where the Godfather had a palm oil trading company called Genco Oil Company, which was supposed to be his front. That's what his office, where he used to go and sit every day. But he had a lot of other activities running behind that. So there's this front company is typically a legal face in front of an illegal activity. Then you have a lot of complex ownership and structures, which is done to confuse who actually owns a particular organization. Bearer shares are allowed in some countries, which is not allowed in India, thankfully. Then there's some geographies which allow legal persons to act as directors. Again, that means somebody can hide behind that person. Undisclosed identity of shareholder, director, and director nominators. So we have shareholder and directors who are nominee shareholders and directors, but the persons who are nominators are not ready to come forward. They want to remain anonymous. That's a dangerous situation. Then you have informal nominee shareholders and directors. I think that's one of the most common things which we see across the country. Even recently, I saw one case where the gardeners and the drivers were used to as directors of various companies by a very rich person or very influential person to run a particular business or a company for a very specific purpose. So this is where it becomes very difficult, because it is informal. It's only the person who's acting in front, maybe that person's behavior or other social patterns, which may alert you to look for something beyond and find whether that person actually owns those shares. So then they have trusts and other legal arrangements. A lot of money gets moved through trusts into other corporate sector. Again, these are very risky areas, because you don't know who actual beneficiary of that trust is. And finally, use of intermediaries. We've seen there are professional intermediaries like accountants, lawyers, and trust and company service providers, or TCSPs. They are one area which is being exploited by the money launderers, because this helps them find a professional guy who will do business for them. At the same time, they can hide behind that person and keep doing business. If we look at a review of risk rating and CDD, so due diligence of customer is not a one-time exercise. It has to be reconfirmed and reviewed based on the risk rating of the customer. As we see, RBI Master Circular says, if a high-risk customer, every 2 years you should get the details about that person. For medium-risk customers, it's 8 years, and for low-risk customers, it's 10 years. So basically, for low-risk customers, you don't have to do too much of worries, because otherwise every 2 years you go to get new documents and you have to send your mails out and check out whether the person, a high risk person, whether he has responded and whether what he is doing at the present, you have to do a complete evaluation like that. As compared to that, it's much easier for a medium risk or a low risk company to stay aloof from that kind of a business. So I think, as I explained, CDD and EDD, these are areas which are areas of separate audit in most of the banks, because this itself is very huge. So when I'm acquiring a customer, when I'm getting all the documents properly, and if I've got the documents, whether I've assessed the person correctly and asked the person to do an enhanced due diligence. If not, then what should be my steps in this regard? And for all that, I think it's better suited, that with the whole audit is split into 2 or 3 parts, and this area, being a large area in itself, is audited separately in most of the banks. Let's look at a case study, very interesting one. So this is a bank called Danske, which is the largest bank of Denmark, which bought a Finnish bank called Sampo. The Sampo had a branch in a place called Estonia. Now, Estonia is basically one of the ex-Soviet Union, territories, which has now become a independent country. Now, this became that Estonian branch. It became the pipeline for flowing of dirty money flow from Russia, Latvia, Azerbaijan, Moldova. So all these ex-Soviet republics, and in some cases even from places like UK. So there was a non-resident portfolio which expanded rapidly. And obviously, as you know, if profits are coming, we tend to ignore other factors. And a small branch like Estonian branch generated about 9% of the total profit for Danske Bank. In 2013, the first warning signal came when JP Morgan, one of the correspondent banks, just told them, we don't want to do business with you. But still, nobody woke up because the profits were so good. People did not want to, disturb the apple cart. However, then after a while, there was a written complaint by one Howard Wilkinson, wherein details about how things are being managed and how funds are going in and out was mentioned. Once this report came, then Danske got worried and they sent their own internal auditors. And they produced a very critical report about the condition of AML process in this particular branch. So what they found is, I think about half of these NRI customers, the KYC documents are not complete. So that can imagine the magnitude of the problem that came through. So once this was finished, the bank closed down the branch in Estonia. However, the damage was already done. By 2017, there is an investigation now going on against Danske Bank in the local market as well as some other places. In 2018, the criminal investigation was taken up by US Department of Justice against Danske Bank because they were the owners. And then Danish public prosecutor for serious economic offences and international offences, she estimated a payment of 12.5. International began, and some 200 billion euro was the amount of money which got transferred through this kind of period, transferred out. And 200 billion euro, let me tell you, was few times the annual GDP of Estonia itself. So that was the level of problem. So once they even closed the branch, what happened? 10 employees of the branch got arrested by the Estonian authorities. The Estonian government asked the branch to close down and said, you don't come back. The CEO had to resign because of the scandal. Authorities charged him for neglect of responsibilities. They also charged the CFO of the bank or the finance director of the bank regarding the same. But now the CEO also faces a USD 400 million lawsuit for destroying shareholder value. So you as a senior management are completely now responsible. People will not leave you if this kind of thing happen. So Danish parliament increased the penalties on money laundering by 8-fold once they saw this problem, and the shares fell drastically. Bank, promised to donate a large amount of money, but still they are expected to pay several million in fines. That kind of, it can destroy a bank's reputation. It's not only in one country. In one country, it's gone. But in people like US prosecutors come in, international prosecutors have come in. So they started investigating. So they've made it very difficult for that bank to operate in a lot of countries. So the whole reputation of the bank goes down. Along with that goes shareholder value, and the senior management gets charged for not looking at the thing properly. So what are the vulnerable products? So I think the foremost one which comes to my mind is trade finance, because their invoicing and valuation both can be misused. Depending on what you want to do, pay or receive money, you can have a under invoicing or over invoicing. Secondly, for terrorist finance point of view, there's something very important called the items of dual use. Some very innocuous chemicals which are used for our day-to-day activities are also used for certain military products like explosives. So any trade of these kind of dual-use products or products which are for military use have to be, looked at very carefully. And even as a bank, you are responsible to ensure that, the money is not misused. Then second thing is wire transfer. Wire transfers are now happening across the world. So major issue is the origination and the final destination. So things move so fast that if I transfer money, withdraw in cash, put it back through another agent, and again transfer it out, it'll be in a few seconds. It can move across a few countries, but I'll never realize it. Similarly, correspondent banking is an area of concern because you are sometimes dealing with people whom you have never met. And depending on the geography from where they operate, depends on the level of compliance that they follow. So if they come from a geography where people are not following compliances strongly, you may have real problems in ensuring what kind of transaction they're executing. Digital wallets and digital banking, I think it's come in a big way, but it has also increased the risk of money laundering in a different way. See, it's great products. It has been brought in financial inclusion, and we need more and more of it, particularly in countries like ours. But at the same time, money can move so fast that it becomes very difficult for us to track unless we have enough measures for tracking all these transactions properly and have connection with the various people, various banks through which the money moves. Finally, it can be of even greater risk if you are allowed to withdraw or deposit by cash which is allowed in a lot of countries, wherein such wallets are operated by small shops, and you can go and deposit money gets transferred. So if you look at it, wallets and the wire transfers, so that risk becomes very heavy. Similarly, money can be withdrawn in the end in cash. Prepaid card, then you charge some money and then you can use it for anything. Now, if you're allowed to use cash or other cash equivalent means, then what money comes into the prepaid card can never be ascertained. And finally, cryptocurrency. Now, all of us are talking about cryptocurrency these days. Now, cryptocurrency is an area of risk because it can, it has been misused. There are a lot of cryptocurrencies which are used in the, what is called the dark web, for dealing with things like drugs and other, banned products. Similarly, if you see the ransomware business, everyone who's got a ransomware or ransomware problem, where people have come in and asked for ransom and they've logged in their computer, they've asked for payment in cryptocurrency, because cryptocurrencies again are not centrally monitored. It is monitored through the blockchain technology. It has an individual control, fine. But once it is generated and you can pay, it goes into an account which is not easy to ascertain. So these are the kind of areas which are very vulnerable so far as banking is concerned. As we go along, normal deposit taking was initially the focus. From there, we have moved on to asset products, and then we have moved into the value-added services. And now, as we go along, I'm sure that this risk will keep on changing, because a money launderer will try to find newer and newer areas to, launder money. So then coming to transaction monitoring. So once a customer relationship is established, the transactions also need to be monitored. And that's where we need help of a AI system, wherein you can feed in a lot of data and you can churn out what transaction looks unusual. So first is, you must understand that the transaction has to be in line with the business profile of the customer. So to ascertain that, you must understand the business profile of the customer clearly, or the person who's dealing with it. This has to be economically justifiable, and the risk profile of the counterparties and the countries of operation is very important. If it's a foreign transaction coming in from, say, risky areas like to be much, much higher. So, as I said earlier, trade finance, wire transfer, correspondent banking, there's certain threshold value is normally put in. Above that, every transaction has to be monitored to ensure that there's no misuse. Any discrepancy or unusual pattern should be noted and investigated further. And it does not cover only transaction which is done, it also covers attempted transactions. So even if there's an attempted transaction which they later on withdrew, you have to still report that same to the FIU. So common red flags, what do you see? The transaction is not economically justified, which I mentioned. So it is inconsistent with the business activity. Use of funds by non-profit organizations that are not consistent with the purpose. So I am a non-profit organization operating in schools. But when I go and find that I'm, putting money to build something of a guest house, so then obviously there is something wrong. So then I need to, dig deeper and find out why this money is being used this way and what are the remedies. Multiple deposits and cash transactions structured just below the reporting level, or with apparently no business logic. So what happens here is that you do a large number of transactions, but you ensure that each of them are below the threshold limit. So you feel that because the threshold limit is getting monitored, it will not be, this will fall through and this will not be monitored. But actually what most banks are now doing is they have defined this, and anything which is just below the threshold level or just above the threshold level, as the case may be, are also tracked so that any misuse can be quickly identified. So frequent wire transfer and cash activities to and from foreign countries. I think I spoke about wire transfer earlier. So if it is coming in and then going out, obviously there's something issue. Why do they have to do that? So if it's coming from a high-risk country, you have to be even more careful. Like presently, I think it is North Korea, Iran, which are in the high-risk countries. So if the money comes in from those sources, you have to ensure that they are properly accounted and properly in the series. And properly tracked for everything. If the customer is anonymous or he's reluctant to provide information, that itself is a red flag. Why that person is behaving this way? So we need to dig further. Adverse press or media reports. It's my experience that adverse press is something which is never let down completely. Because if you find any adverse press, it's likely that there is something wrong with this whole system. And that is why this is happening. So this is something which we need to understand. And any adverse press related issue should be handled very, very carefully. So regarding alert generation, system should be generating the alerts, whatever system you are using. Now there are a lot of off-the-shelf systems is available. So I'm not giving any system name. It's up to you to find out. Then there's transactions or group transactions which do not fit regular pattern. As I said, you have to have the AI system to actually find out whether there is any issue like this. And discrepancy in customer profile and documentation, frequent transaction below threshold level, which I already discussed. Report by frontline and operating staff is very important because they are meeting the customer. If they see something irregular or find something which is not fitting the pattern, their reports become very important. Again, adverse press and media I have already mentioned. And all such cases should get referred to the principal officer who is or the compliance officer who is managing ML and TF. And then it is for him to ascertain all the facts through his department and not to tip off the customer. Again, a very important thing. You cannot tip off the customer. The customer should not know that there is some kind of proceeding against him, because until the government actually comes and takes it up with him, because we as an organization are not supposed to warn the customer or tip him off in any way so that he becomes careful. So once we decide it's a suspicious activity, it has to be reported. Now, what are the reports we have to submit in India? We have the cash transactions report, which is 10 lakhs or equivalent within 1 calendar month. Counterfeit currency report, which involves any counterfeit or fictitious fake currency notes, as we call it. Non-profit organization transaction report, so any transaction by a non-profit organization or a single transaction of more than 10 lakhs or equivalent in foreign currency. Cross-border wire transfer. I mentioned about wire transfer, any wire transfer beyond 5 lakhs in foreign currency. And all these have to be reported within 15 days of the succeeding month. Then there is a suspicious transaction report, which we discussed. So what is important is there should be a reasonable ground for suspicion and appears unusual or complex in nature, and economic rationale is not clear. So all these things coming together, each one of them or all of them, which gives rise to a suspicion in your mind, has to be reported. And this any reporting has to be 7 working days within identifying the suspicious transaction. So there's no fixed date. So if I identify it today, then within 7 days, I must report this to the authorities. So finally, know your employees. In today's context, that's become very important. So particularly for key employees, you have to identify the background of the employee, take a credit score, match their experience and qualification, and feedback from referees. This is important because a lot of times you've seen when a person comes in with a dubious character, he triggers off these kind of transactions with the help of certain customers who are applying to him. AML training is very important. So there has to be a system of training which gets tracked. So you have to tell them what is the basic requirements, circumstances based on which you are supposed to report, details of person to whom the report should be filed, and such trainings are usually conducted at when you join new and as a refresher. Record of these trainings are maintained to ensure that everybody in the organization who's have undertaking the training. Finally, maintenance of records. I'm not going to go much into this. I think I'm just in time. So any cash transaction, any series connected transactions over 10 lakhs, forged transactions, suspicious transactions, wire transfers, purchase and sale of immovable property, which I mentioned earlier, is also now come under purview of 50 lakhs. And all these kind of transactions, if it comes into your notice, you have to maintain records of this. And this record has to be maintained for a period of 5 years after the date of cessation of the transaction. Suppose the loan is there, the loan is repaid. After that, you have to retain all these records for 5 years. That is the understanding. The common weaknesses which we see are inadequate CDD and EDD practices. So there's always this idea, okay, the business is more important, so you do a KYC and start the business quickly without completing the risk identification. Inadequate identification of high-risk customers. Policy procedures and trainings are not adequate. Failure to monitor and identify suspicious activity, because you can see the suspicious activity at a particular level only when you are able to monitor it. Poor reporting and filing practices, ineffective independent testing and audit functions. So that's important for us. We as auditors have to ensure that we have adequate testing to ensure all these areas are fulfilled. And financial institutions have to are more reactive in certain cases. So they have to become more and more proactive as they go along. I think that's all. And so there are certain recent trends which I am not going to go through. All I can say that the regulators are being very, very proactive, and they're starting to increase the penalties, and the level of penalties are now becoming humongous. And not only banks, even all kinds of financial institutions are now under this scrutiny. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Deb. So we have some questions coming in.
Yeah.
What would be considered the identification date, the day suspicious transaction is identified, or the day approval from PO is received to file the STR?
See, basically, approval from PO is the final step, because that's where the PO is the final authority who decides whether this is a suspicious transaction or not. So technically, the day PO signs off, it becomes the day when you have actually identified it. Because what happens initially is, if a frontline staff identifies a particular transaction, then it has to come to a central authority who has to do a further investigation and decide. So it's only basically when the final central authority has decided, that's when is the date of the identification of the transaction.
All right. On similar lines to CIBIL, for retail customer screening, a central KYC of RBI is in place. How far the banking systems are integrated, including local and MNC banks, and how seamless and real-time is the verification? Also, can potential ongoing money laundering incidents be reported to CKYC by any time frames?
See, my understanding of CKYC is that it is something where you maintain the records of a person. The identification and the address records, basically. So it's good for individual customers, and I think once that person, you opened a CKYC account and you have a CKYC number and refer to it, as an individual customer, when you go, you can get the basic identification done. I'm not sure whether they have now started any practice where you can report any money laundering incident, because my understanding it will not be, because normally when you are identifying a suspicious transaction, it goes into a reporting to FIU. And as I said, there could be no tipping off. So therefore, any public database having that record is unlikely. Again, the advantage of CKYC is good for individual customers, but when we are looking at money laundering, the bigger amount comes from the legal persons and legal arrangements. And I think there, the process has to be still followed as it is.
Okay. So now that takes us to the next question. What should be the next course of action for a bank once STR is filed, since tipping off is not allowed as per the RBI?
See, if STR is filed, there is no further action unless the authorities come back and ask you to do something. So if the authorities might come back and ask you to find further data, file further data, or under the UAPA, Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, if they come up and ask you to freeze an account, at that point only you can freeze an account and tell the customer.
Okay.
Because that is a government order. It's like a legal order, court order.
Right. So we don't have any further questions coming in. So I think we can wrap up this session out here. So thank you, Deb Malia, for sharing your thoughts on this ever interesting compliance topic of anti-money laundering. And we are very happy to have you as a speaker over here.
Thank you, Percy, and thank you. And it's a pleasure to come back to the IIF platform to be able to contribute to the platform. As you know, I've been a member for a long time with this organization.
Thank you.